All right. It looks like we've got about everyone in who's going to be here. So without further ado, let's get started. Hi, I'm Tom Levine, Cornerstone's tech guru. If you've been attending a few of our other webinars, you should recognize my voice. But today we're going to be talking about web browsers, which in my opinion is a good follow-up to our last webinar that we gave. Last time when we talked, we spoke about how the internet really works, how to hook up home Wi-Fi, and how computers really talk to each other and how networking in general works. Web browsers are sort of an extension of that. So they're an app used by your computer, your phone, your tablet, whatever device you're using to access the World Wide Web. That's sort of your portal into viewing all of those websites and all of those remote computing solutions. So without further ado, let's get started. But first, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions about anything I'm covering during this presentation, please feel free to type it in that questions box right over there. It's highlighted on our slide right now in red. I will get to it, I promise, if you have a question, but I am going to wait for a good breaking point, and then we'll circle back around. Likely that'll be after I finish explaining one or two of the browser features that I'm talking about in the presentation. In addition, our incentive program is still on. The top qualifier will receive $5,000, and one lucky winner will get a weekend getaway. In order to qualify for this, you just got to write groups that are new to Cornerstone or individuals that are new to Cornerstone for medical and ancillary sales. A minimum of 2,000 points is required for a cash reward and a chance to win the getaway, but the top 20 brokers are going to earn cash prizes. And in order to participate in that, you've got to register online on our website. Just head out to www.crnstone.com /2021-incentive for further details. And last bit of notes before we continue is that as we all navigate through the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of different carriers and legislative leaders are issuing guidance and information regarding this virus. Please visit the coronavirus information pages on the Cornerstone website to get the latest of updates on the carrier and legislative changes. We update the page every day, so feel free to go out there daily to check, and you know you're going to be receiving the most up-to-date information. So without further ado, we're going to get into good web browsers. A good thought to have in mind when you're looking around at all the different options is to have an idea of what makes a good browser for you. Mainly this means what sort of device you're using when you're browsing, like a tablet, a desktop computer, or a phone even. This really does factor into which version of which browser you're going to get, but we'll get a little bit more in detail with that on the next slide. The next thing you'll need to consider, though, is what operating system you use. A lot of people use either Mac or PC, which is Apple products or Microsoft products. Believe it or not, there are some operating systems that are incompatible with certain web browsers. So you're going to want to make sure that the web browser that you're using is compatible with your device. Just off the top of my head, Safari, which is one we're going to be covering later today, is exclusive to non-Windows machines, and more specifically, it's exclusive to Apple products and the Mac OS. If you don't have that, you can't use Safari. So it's something to consider when you're looking around at all your different options. In addition, you're going to want to think about how much multitasking you'll be doing. This pertains to how many different tabs or different windows of the browser you're going to have open, because some are more optimized for that than others. And lastly is how much you care about who gets your browsing data. We'll discuss that a little bit more in detail when we talk about Chrome, though. And then some additional features to consider. The first would be cross-device connectivity. So can the browser transfer information between all of your devices? This is a feature that sort of came out at the start of maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but it's now kind of come to the forefront as a big feature of different web browsers. Essentially, if you have the browser installed on your phone, on your tablet, and on your computer, So long as you have an account with a lot of the different browsers, it'll actually store your browsing history, your favorites, and all of the sort of personalizations you've made on one device and automatically carry that over to your browser in another device. I think this is extremely useful if you're trying to get to a page that you were looking at on your desktop, maybe, and now you're on your tablet at work and you're trying to find the same page to share to someone. I think it's really useful for news articles as well, and I love browsers that support that option. In addition, you're going to want to think about how much information you want to share with the creators of your web browser, as well as what they're going to do with that information. Web browsers like Google Chrome and Firefox and even Internet Explorer to some extent collect your browsing data in the form of either cookies or other sort of tracking software. And then a lot of times, because different content is free, they'll use that to sort of supplement their income and sell it to the highest bidder. Facebook also does this a lot, and a lot of other websites do it too. So it's something to consider what you feel comfortable sharing with the creators of your web browser and how much information those people have on you when you move forward. Another feature to consider are different unique features or advantages about the web browser in general. There are a lot of different options that make web browsers all different from each other, and you're going to want to consider those advantages and disadvantages when choosing a web browser as well. Lastly, you'll want to just mention again optimization with your device for the web browser, meaning does the browser actually fit well with the device you're using? This is different than your operation or your OS compatibility that I mentioned before. If you're using a mobile browser on a desktop computer, obviously it's going to run fast, but it's probably not going to have all the features that you can really get, and you're not making the most appropriate use of that browser. And finally is the total amount of resources used when the browser is active. This sort of ties back into what I mentioned before on how many tabs you have open and multitasking when you're using the browser. But we're going to get more in depth with that here in a minute as well. I'm going to cover two web browsers actually, specifically in this PowerPoint, and then we're going to jump into showing off the different advantages of three others. Specifically, that's just for compatibility issues in respect to Safari. I'm giving this presentation on a Windows 7 enabled desktop, and because it is Windows 7 enabled, I can't actually do any sort of Safari browsing. But I can still talk about the general features of it, along with Microsoft Edge, the older version as well. We're going to start with Microsoft Edge, though. First off, it's sort of meant to be the replacement to Internet Explorer. We're going to mention this again when we get to it, but Internet Explorer now is more described as a compatibility issue with older Windows operating systems rather than an actual web browser. Microsoft Edge was originally designed to replace that and had a lot of the same features that Internet Explorer did, just deployed in a more secure fashion. It is exclusive to desktop or mobile Windows 10 devices, so if you're using any sort of Mac operating system, you're out of luck. Can't use Edge, although the older version, in my opinion, you're really not missing much. It requires 16 whole gigabytes on a 32-bit Windows system and 2 gigabytes on a 64-bit Windows system, respectively, in order to run. And that is a lot of information. When I was doing some research on Firefox and Chrome, they measure their file sizes in megabits, not gigabits, which is an order of magnitude of about 1,000 less than the gigabit file sizes that I'm giving you here. What I'm trying to get across, I guess, is that the Microsoft web browsers for Edge, at least the older version, took up not only a lot of space on your desktop, but required a lot of information as far as RAM is concerned. What this means is that you can't really multitask well with it. Pages take a lot longer to load, and it's generally a little bit clunky if you're just doing basic web browsing. The reason that it takes up so much space, however, is that it's really optimized for web developers, similarly to Microsoft's Internet Explorer that it was meant to replace. There are a lot of different advanced user settings and plugin supports that some web browsers have but are kind of buried in the settings. But they have these up at the forefront, so it makes it really useful if you're trying to do full-on website development. Of course, a lot of people don't really use those features, so Microsoft Edge and Internet Explorer sort of go over their head. Like I mentioned, because of all the advanced use settings, can slow things down, but it's really optimized for cloud access, professional use, and it does have that device cross-compatibility and device transfer information that I mentioned before, which means any sort of browsing you were doing in old Edge will transfer over to any other device you have with Edge installed, or at least the old version. The reason I mentioned the old version, however, is because that changed in 2020, which is another reason why I don't have Edge installed on this device. With New Edge, which is the version of Microsoft Edge that Microsoft released here at the start of 2020, they changed a lot. Instead of being more a successor to Internet Explorer and having all of those options available, it changed to be based on a Chromium engine. Chromium is the underlying basic file that is used to support Google Chrome. Because Google Chrome is much more widely used software and it has a lot less data that it stores natively on your computer, this sped Edge up considerably. Instead of clicking on a website link and having to wait maybe a whole 3 seconds for the page to load, now in New Edge you click it and it opens up pretty immediately. It operates very similarly to Chrome, which we will be sort of walking you through a little bit later, but it's still changing. Because it released at the start of 2020 and Microsoft likes to tweak their products a lot after they launch, I didn't feel comfortable really going in depth about what New Edge is. I'm expecting there will be a lot of changes throughout this year and next year as they add more to Microsoft Edge and update it to make it really competitive with other browsers. It's still really useful if you've got a Windows device. And in fact, they actually made it backwards compatible. So now you can use Old Edge on Windows 7 and Windows 8 because it's based on the Chromium engine. And Windows 7 and 8 can support Chrome. It also has better video chatting and much higher quality internal video support than Firefox does. Natively what Firefox has, and we'll be covering that one later too, but Firefox only has automatic uploads of 720p. You can still view things in the browser in 1080p or higher resolutions if you're concerned about very high quality sort of video, audio, that's fine. But when you're chatting through a web browser using sort of online streaming services and instant chats, Edge actually, and Chrome for that matter, will have the edge as far as resolution for what you're actually putting out on the web. This means that if you're using like a high quality webcam and you're using Firefox, you're not going to get as high resolution from it based on that sort of setting. In addition, what I think is really cool about the new Edge browser is it allows you to access not only the Chrome store for add-ons and apps, but also the Microsoft store for add-ons and apps, which means you're not limited to just one source of apps. Instead, you're having access to like 2 whole different store systems. Although a lot of specific to Microsoft apps aren't available on the Chrome store, a lot of Chrome apps are actually available on the Microsoft store. I think this was more intended as sort of an optimization for those who are transitioning to Microsoft software versus just Google software, but we'll get into that in a minute when we cover Chrome. And also, like I said, expect a lot of updates. It's definitely not a finalized browser at this point. They have made significant improvements, but if you're using the newer version of Microsoft Edge, it's going to be a little bit more play as you go, a little bit more optimization will be coming, and a lot of the menus might change. So just something to be aware of. Then I'll also mention Safari before we switch to our practical demonstration. Safari is actually the native browser used by almost all Mac OSs, meaning Mac OS X or any sort of Macintosh device you might have at home, which is Apple again. You're going to have Safari installed natively. And actually, honestly, for Mac users, I don't recommend getting something else. Safari is a really good web browser if you're just doing basic things online. And before more recent releases, I think they cut support back in 2012 or 2010. They used to be able to have Safari on Windows desktops as well. It's what I used to run back when I was in high school and middle school, and I loved it. They have intelligent tracking prevention on Safari, which means that anything more than like a website cookie that's being used to track your data will be blocked by Safari. One thing to consider, though, when using it is that might cause some compatibility issues with some websites. You might get a notification that says you need to accept X, Y, or Z software in order to access this website, and you might have to give permission for some of the ones you access. One of the things that I like about Safari, though, is it has native sandboxing. Sandboxing is something that I don't expect you would know about unless you are a more tech-savvy person. But essentially what it does is it means that each tab or each window of Safari you have open runs the code for those websites separately. And to translate a little bit more, what that means is if you encounter a malicious website and you have 20 tabs open in your Safari web browser, and your problem is just with one tab, if you close that tab, it's not going to shut down your entire browser. If someone's trying to get at your computer through that web browser portal as well, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, and they're not going to see what else you're doing in Safari because all the code is separate. I think that's a really neat feature, and I think it's really useful as far as security and as far as app reliability goes. It also does have that secure data sharing, which means that they sort of encrypt website data going back and forth between the web browser and the actual website itself. Don't confuse that with having an integrated VPN. People can still see where you are, where you're from, all that sort of stuff, as long as they get into the browser. But what that means is you're going to be able to share that data more securely, and instead of having every single website log every single thing that you've ever done, it's only going to show what the website needs and requests. In addition to that, it has integrated password randomization and storage, which means that you don't really have to remember a bunch of unique passwords for different websites for it to be, the same or similar. A lot of times on Windows devices, you're going to have like a separate service for something like this. But basically what it means is it automatically generates passwords for your websites. And then as long as you have a master password that Safari knows, you just enter that one. Safari enters the unique password into the website, and you're good to go. It makes things a lot more secure if you're trying to store a bunch of online accounts, and it just makes things a little bit easier for the user in my mind. Also, it is connected to all other Apple devices through your Apple ID. So if you have a full iPhone, Mac, sort of suite of devices at your disposal, Safari will be able to transfer that data back and forth between all of your browsers on all your devices. It does sort of limit your choices, though. So if I wanted to, say, get a Windows phone and still run a Mac at home, I couldn't then transfer my browsing data back and forth because Safari is native to Apple's ecosystem. Just something that I kind of found a little bit sad about it. I really did enjoy Safari when I was using it, and it's wonderful if you're operating on a Mac. But if you're running a Windows PC, obviously, it's not an option that's available to you. So getting out of our presentation for a moment, or at least the PowerPoint slides, I'm going to go through Internet Explorer, Chrome, and Firefox separately, sort of as a practical demo. A lot of these different options, I'll kind of go through the pros and cons and compare them. So don't feel like you're missing out if you don't have one of these downloaded. Also, if you're interested in downloading any of these at the end of the presentation, I'm going to be sending out an email to all of the people who attended with links for all of these different browsers and where to find them, aside from Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer actually comes natively installed on every single Windows device, But like I said before, it's not one I really recommend. Also, I have all of these toolbars enabled here to go through them. But if you see a toolbar that you like or that you might want to have enabled, all you have to do that is right-click on the top of this window here and go through these bar icons. Each one of these that I have checked is a separate status bar. The menu is what I have right up here with File, Edit, View, Favorites, Tools, and Help. This is just the general menu bar for use in Internet Explorer. There's also a Favorites bar. What the Favorites bar is this bar right underneath here that's below it. This star with the little arrow takes you to a breakout of all of your saved favorited sites. And then it also has Bing suggested sites because it is a Microsoft product. It has Bing integration. And also the web slice gallery, which isn't really something I think you'll ever need to use. Basically, it stores a bunch of your cut different things from the web. So it's not something you'll really be using, in my opinion. We also have the command bar. The command bar, if I go ahead and disenable it and re-enable it here just to show you, is this area right down here. This gives you access to print options, reading different email options that you can get through the browser as well. It also enables you to view different website feed, content feeds, sort of active subscriptions through RSS, and the home menu here. This just jumps you straight to your home page. In addition, it gives you access to all of the different page options, your safety options, meaning ActiveX filtering, which basically turns on and off the ActiveX plugin, which is something we're going to get to here in a minute when we talk about plugins in Google Chrome, and also tools. These tools right here, in my mind, are probably the most useful aspect of this section of the browser because it has the pop-up blocker that you can turn on and off, as well as being able to jump in to view your downloads, as well as managing add-ons. The add-ons that you have are things that are not natively installed on the browser, but are things that you can just sort of add on as extras. I don't think it's very easy to do, however, in Internet Explorer, and I think that it's not something I'd highly recommend doing if you're running Internet Explorer because of how slow things load. You can also do compatibility view settings, which will make the website you're viewing a little bit more compatible and or show you different errors of that website and why it's not compatible with what you're browsing. Like I said before, Internet Explorer is being phased out, so you're going to have a lot of compatibility issues, especially in a bunch of newer websites if you use Internet Explorer. You can also toggle full screen mode, which takes your web browser out of its windowed setting that you're used to seeing, which is how I drag it around my screen like I just did. If I hit F11, that is the shortcut key to it, and it automatically full screens everything that I'm doing. If I hit F11 again, that will take it out of full screen mode. I think full screen mode is pretty useful if you're just trying to browse the web and don't want to deal with anything else. But outside of that, it's not something I find particularly useful. You can also gain access to the developer tools through this menu, which is F12 as well. Like I said, Internet Explorer and a bunch of the Microsoft browsing options are more optimized for web developers, not exactly casual web users. And that's why things load pretty slowly in it. In addition, I have my suggested sites here, which are sites that the browser will recommend to me based on my browsing history, as well as linked OneNote. If you subscribe to the full Microsoft Office 365 suites, you can send notes on these web browsers directly into your folders there. And also you gain access to the full Internet Options menu by clicking that drop down there as well. A lot of these menu options, though, you can get to from the main file like home system of the main menu. So I don't really like to have a bunch of these enabled typically. You can get into appearance settings here in the Internet options, being colors, languages, fonts, accessibility, things like that, as well as the different security options, which just generally shows you how it's connecting to the Internet. It doesn't really let you fully customize your protected modes. If I click on custom level here, it gives you a bunch of options that you probably wouldn't be familiar with unless you really understand what your web browser is doing. Like I said, it's more optimized for web developers rather than casual web users. The real reason that I don't recommend it, though, and sorry, before we get into that, you can click each of these little tab settings to open up new tabs. It has a breakaway of all of your frequently accessed sites in these new tabs. And then you can also automatically search in the web bar, similar to any other browser. If I were to just search Cornerstone and hit enter, as you can see, it loads up Bing pretty easily there. But if I click, sorry, that's actually our firewall, not an issue of the browser. But if I were to click a website from here, like a Cornerstone Broker Insurance Services Agency, as you can see, it did take it a second to load. That's not actually because of the computer. That's actually because of the web browser. It's a lot slower than other web browsers that I would be used to using, which is why I don't really recommend it. That's a lot of the general settings of Internet Explorer, and I'm not really going to get too much more in depth into it, just because I don't really recommend it as a browser. But that being said, if you're interested in learning a bit more or have any other questions, please pop them in the chat, and I'll get to it here in a second. The next one that we're doing, however, is one of the main flagship browsers that I'd recommend. Google Chrome and Firefox are the two that I think are most useful on Windows PCs, but we're going to be going through Google Chrome first. Chrome is very, very useful if you're planning on adding a lot of different add-ons and sort of customization features to a browser. It's linked directly to Google, so all of your web browsing history will be stored by Google, and then your data is going to be sold. That there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. One of the reasons that I kind of recommend shying away from this browser, well, there are really mainly two, are if you are very concerned about the privacy of the data of what you're using your web browser for, and if you're not going to be using a lot of different Google features, then I would really kind of steer you toward maybe another browser, but it's still pretty useful. It has a lot of different add-ons and native web stores and apps that I think are pretty good. You can get those by hitting this web store option. That'll bring you straight into the Google Chrome suite of different extensions and add-ons. This is really what makes Chrome a very useful browser, in my opinion, because they just have so much that you can natively throw onto the browser. It actually starts with a pretty low file size compared to like Firefox or Internet Explorer for that matter. So it's going to run a lot faster at first, but as you add a lot of other modifications and add-ons to it, it's going to start running a little bit more slowly, and you're going to notice that because it taxes your computer a little bit more than other web browsers. If you're using a mobile browser in something like a phone or a tablet, I would recommend shying away from Google Chrome, mostly just because it's going to be rather slow on less high-end computing devices. It also will prompt you, if it's not your native browser, as will a lot of ones nowadays, to automatically make it your main browser. So if you're not using it as a main browser and more using it just to access certain websites, just make sure you don't click that option and you won't have to deal with it. You can go back and forth between web pages using this arrow icon up here in these main menu sections, as well as reloading pages using that little circle button over here as well. Just to make sure everyone can see it, I'm going to mark that real quick using the drawing option. We're talking specifically about these options right up in here. In addition to that, you, similarly to Internet Explorer, have this option right up here to automatically type in Google things. If I were to Google Cornerstone and hit enter, then it loads up Internet Explorer and, I'm sorry, it loads up Google and it searches for Cornerstone. This pop-up right here is also something that makes me kind of mention Google trying to get every little bit of information about you. I'm using a desktop right now, and Google doesn't automatically know my location because I haven't given it that permission and I haven't signed into a Google account. So it's trying to prompt me to figure out where I am, and typically what Google will say is why we want to know that is to give you better search results and give you better access to all of the different things that you can get in your area. Personally, I am not going to allow this. I don't like Google trying to figure out everything about me. But if you're not interested in that, or you want better results and you're already tied into a bunch of other Google Suite options, this isn't something that would really concern you. I'm going to hit block because I don't want it knowing my tracking location settings, and it'll display a lot of these icons up here sort of in the browser bar. See how it has this sort of tracking icon that I'm scrolled over right here? That's because the page has been blocked from tracking my location. If I were to turn it on, it likely wouldn't even display anything. This little lock icon up here also allows me to view my secure connection status. Because it says it's secure, I know that my data is being encrypted when I access the search result. In addition, I can change these location option blocks here as well, and I can view more detailed information about the website I'm using when I click on that locked logo as well, including the website certificate and different cookies that are in use. Cookies specifically are tiny little programs that are used to track user settings when a user logs into a website. So for example, if I had a specific user account on maybe a renter's insurance site, when I log back in, cookies are what allows your web browser to say, or allows the actual page, I'm sorry about that misspeak, it allows the page that you're accessing to sort of know, okay, we know it's this person accessing us from this browser instead of tracking you specifically by IP. If you block all use of all cookies, you're going to have a lot of issues accessing websites because a lot of websites now require cookie tracking in order to allow you access to their website or to use a bunch of different features that are plugged into that website. So if you're concerned about being tracked online, you're still going to want to accept cookies anyway. In addition to that, just as far as the web browser features go, to open up a new tab, similar to basically any Internet Explorer or web browser you're using these days, just click on the plus option and it will open a new tab. Here I'll mention again, though, that Google Chrome does start to eat through your total available space. And what I mean by that isn't the amount of space on your hard drive, but the amount of RAM that your computer is actively using. RAM specifically is sort of like the blackboard of your computer's mind. Think of it as being able to think across a lot of different topics at once. Each individual tab of Google Chrome tends to use about 2 megabytes of RAM individually. Now, when you consider that a normal computer has about 8 gigabytes of RAM, that can add up kind of quickly, especially considering that the more tabs you open, the amount of RAM being used by the web browser tends to increase. That's just why I recommend steering away from Chrome on more of a mobile device. They do have a version of Chrome that you can download from most app stores on your phone that is more optimized to those devices, but I still tend to shy away from it because even the mobile version of Chrome tends to eat through a lot of your renewable access memory, and it tends to make your computer work a little bit harder depending on how much you have installed. In addition to that, though, you can favorite a website and bookmark it by clicking on the star icon, very similarly to probably the web browser you use now if you're in Chrome, or if you're not in Chrome, it's just kind of a favorites option. If I were to click that icon, it'll bring up my bookmark added. I can rename the site, so I like what it's called right now, Cornerstone Google Search, and I can choose where I want to store it. By default, it'll store it in your bookmarks bar. But you can also store in a bunch of other bookmarks folders, which I think is fairly useful as well. If I were trying to bookmark a lot of different web pages, I could create different folders by using the choose another folder option, and then hitting new folder to say maybe like cooking sites, or if I want to add another new folder, I could do like maybe a web example. And then to save the name of the folder, you just have to hit save. Then I also have access to my Google account. If I log into that, then it'll apply any personalization settings that you would have for any of your Google accounts. So if you tend to use a lot of Google products, you're probably going to want to sign in. This also gives Google a lot more information about who you are and how you're going to be integrating other web services as well. So if you're kind of like me and don't like sharing a lot of your information with a different providers, that's not something you'd probably want to do in the browser. And a lot of the reason I recommend Google Chrome as a web browser is because of how integrated it can be and how many different extensions you can get. So if you're not going to log in my opinion, it's not really worth downloading the browser. But, you can even use it as a guest, so it doesn't really matter. You still gain access to all of the different features that Google Chrome will provide. In addition, this triple dot option up here is sort of like file in Internet Explorer if you're trying to sort of convert between them. You can open up a new tab automatically from this menu, as well as a new incognito window. Incognito windows, by the way, are what people use to browse a little bit more privately. That doesn't mean that it's restricting all of your information, but it means that any sort of website that you access using an incognito window will not actually be stored as history in the web browser. It basically makes it so the web browser itself does not track your information. One thing to note, though, is your ISP and being your internet service provider, and any sort of information that a website is using to automatically pull things up aren't being fully, blocked or not tracked. The websites that you access will still know, okay, this computer from this location is accessing it from this IP. It is not a replacement for a VPN. But what it does is it just, makes it so that your web browser doesn't actually store all your information. So something to consider if you're trying to use an incognito window. You can also gain access to your full history using this history option. If I click on history using Control H, it'll bring up the full history of browsing data that it has stored. Because I'm not fully logged into Google, it doesn't show all of my browsing history, but what it does is it will show all of the browsing history from this device. And if I click on tabs from other devices and add a device into the account integration, or if I have my Google account logged in, if I click on tabs from other devices, it will automatically show all of the tabs that I've accessed, say, from Google Chrome on my smartphone here, if I were to sign in. In addition, I can clear my browsing data by clicking on that and then accessing through these options. I can clear my browsing data from the last hour, 24 hours, 7 days, last 4 weeks, or from all time. And it'll clear out your browsing history, the cookies of what's stored on the websites, and cached image files. This means files that have been stored sort of in temporary memory. If I hit clear data, then it will automatically clear that information. You can also clear more narrowly and through more advanced settings as well, but that's more of an advanced use case, so I'm not going to get too deep into it. In addition to that, though, from history, you can also gain access to your downloads here. And as you can see, it's opening things up in different tabs. This is sort of the native option for Chrome. So if you're trying to explore your different options, don't think you're going to navigate away from a web page automatically. I can also zoom in or zoom out on different things from different websites using this option here that I'm using now labeled zoom. And I can also even use a clickable option to go full screen with my web browser. If I hit F11, I can get out of it, but this restricts the actual web browser, so I can't automatically just pull up the web address and all of those header links that I had been showing you before. To exit, I just hit F11. I think that's useful because I sometimes accidentally go into this option and have to find my way out, and I know a lot of other people do the same. Actually, we have a very good question here from Jeff Nestor, which was, does Google Maps and Google Drive apps track everything too? Yes, they do. Not only do they track your information, they also track everything that you've searched through there. It also gets very, very aggressive in what you're searching. So if you like partially type a search into your browser information, a lot of times it won't necessarily store that you've searched that, but it'll store that you were accessing that application. So it won't store necessarily what you were searching, but it will store that you had it active. So it gets really, really aggressive. And that's what I don't really particularly like about Google. But it's sort of a trade-off because they integrate pretty much every single part of all of their services together. They almost need access sort of on that level to provide a lot of the services that they want to. So it's something that I personally get a little concerned about because I don't like being tracked in that sort of in-depth level. But if you're trying to use a bunch of integrated services that Google can provide and you're trying to really take full advantage of what Google does, it's something that you kind of have to give them access to. And once again, because they do sell a lot of browsing data to that, it's a trade-off. I think Google does provide a lot of really great services, but if you're more interested in your data security, it's not something I'd really take advantage of more in full. If you use Google Docs a lot, which a lot of different brokers do, and I know that I use a lot as well, when I'm trying to share information very easily with other people, it'll store all your files to a local Google server, and they have full access to all of that because they own the server. So it's something to consider. In addition to those sort of zoom options, you can also print pages. I mention this because on a lot of more updated options, as you can see, I have our local printer here, but I could also save things as a PDF from this option as well. So I could print a full view of a web page using this. I can save all of the pages from this specific search result here using the Save to PDF option. I can choose my orientations, and I can even access more advanced settings if I don't like the scale of what it would be printed, if I don't want to, say, include headers and footers on the print that I'm using, or if I don't want to include background graphics or do want to include background graphics as well. So all of these options make it very easy to store sort of a print off of a web page. This is how I tend to save pages that are like temporary to my desktop. So if I'm maybe even viewing a secure email from a carrier and I want to save that information for later access, or if I want to share that information with someone else, you can print that off using these settings as a PDF and then send that PDF file as an email to whoever you're trying to share that information to. One thing to note, though, just because we've been bringing up all these security settings, if you're accessing a sort of secure bit of information through Google Chrome, like through a secure portal like a secure email, it won't store like any of that private information. It'll just say you're accessing a secure portal. So don't be concerned if you're using Google Chrome that it's pulling all of this secure data on everyone every time you look things up. That's not what Google does. They don't view the exact details of the web page. They just track your browsing history and specifically the websites that you access, along with some of the general content and a lot of the cookies that you're accessing. They're not accessing the like specific client information that you've been pulling up on your web pages. So don't worry about that. The last few options are things that I'd really mention. You can, if you're not using keyboard shortcuts, edit, cut, copy, and paste text that you have highlighted using these sections down here. And you can get into your general settings for the browser here if you want to, say, change a theme. One last little unique feature that I like actually about Google Chrome and why I have it installed anyway on my home computer is this cast option right here. This cast option allows you to connect to, if you have a Chrome sort of add-on or a Chrome TV or any sort of device that can connect to any sort of Google Chrome features, you can actually display those tabs on other devices. I use this a lot from my phone, and because I have a lot of memory on my phone, I have it installed. And what I'll do oftentimes if I'm trying to share presentation information with people is I will pull it up on my TV, and then I will hit this cast option. And because my TV is connected to my local network, when I hit the cast option, it pulls up that TV as an option to cast my screen to, and I can actually show not only the screen of my desktop, but the screen of the browser as well on that TV. It's very useful if you have other sort of Chrome dongles and other sort of Google devices all across your home that you're trying to integrate. So that's what I use the cast tab for. It's something that's not necessarily unique to Chrome. You can still cast with a bunch of other add-ons in a lot of other web browsers, but the fact that it's natively installed, I think, is a good feature. Yeah. And sort of on a more basic level, you can minimize the browser by hitting that minimize option, get into your windowed options by clicking the window. It'll full screen the window or make it sort of partial by using that option. And then you can exit out of the browser or tab by clicking that X. Also, as I've been doing through this presentation, you can close individual tabs by hitting on the X mark on the tab. So that's Chrome in a nutshell, but there's also Firefox. Firefox is the main competitor to Google Chrome, in my opinion. And the reason that I like Firefox specifically is because it is a lot more private. I actually am already logged into or not my specific Mozilla account, but an example Mozilla account I created using my Cornerstone email here, just to display some general features, because a lot of the features that we're going to be getting into when using this web browser are only available if you have a Mozilla account or if you have a account with Firefox. Firefox is produced by Mozilla, and Mozilla as a company is, in my mind, a lot more concerned about the privacy of what you do online. Whereas Google Chrome will track not only every single web page you've been to and share that information with a bunch of other people, Mozilla tracks that information specifically to improve their website, and they don't sell information. The only information they'll really collect from you is information that they use to improve their browser. And while they do occasionally share information with other web developers to make things a little bit more compatible with their browser, they're very open with you about what they're sharing. If you Google Mozilla security, then you'll actually pretty much at the first link be led to a web page where they talk very, very in depth about the information they're collecting on you and the information that they're actually sharing. So because they're so transparent with what they're doing, and because in my mind they're a lot more private, I think it's wonderful. I'm going to actually sign into Sync real quick. And well, I guess it didn't store my information when I signed in yesterday, unfortunately. Yes, it actually did somewhat store it. So let's go ahead and enter my password. So that I can show you sort of the full advantages of the suite. It'll actually prompt you up here if you want to save your login too. So as you can see, Firefox does store that information if you choose it. You can say don't save, or you can choose to never save using this drop-down option. This means that the browser and Mozilla itself won't have access to your passwords if you do that. Also, you can show the password by clicking on that option. I'm not going to because I want things to be a bit more secure. It also asks you to sync information across your phone. You can enter your phone number, and that way it will kind of add another step of verification as well when you log in, so that people can't just log in and access your Firefox account. I'm going to skip this option for now, though. Now that I'm signed in, if I go back to our main page and click on the drop-down, as you can see, it will show us a few other options when we get into some of the more decent details. Like in with Chrome, you can use this sort of menu over here on the side. Instead of 3 dots, it's 3 dashed lines to access some of the more advanced features of the browser. Things like the web page zoom are located very easily and displayed right over here. And they also have full screening available as well, very similarly. What I find a little bit more useful about Google Chrome's, or not Google Chrome, sorry, about Mozilla's full screen versus Google Chrome's full screen is just by scrolling your mouse up, you still gain access to your browsing window as well. If I exit that though to show you some of the other features, similar to Chrome, back and forth between your websites is right over here. You can reload your web pages, and they have this little home icon to go to your home page. By default, it tends to be either Mozilla's homepage or Google, depending on what version you're downloading. But it, in my mind, can be very easily changed as well. If I use these triple dot options, I can add bookmarks, and it operates in a very similar manner to Google Chrome, so I'm not going to go in depth on it. But the things that I like about it are that I can actually send tabs across devices if I'm logged in and have a device recognized. So if I were, say, about to walk away from my computer and wanted to pull up the website that I just had open on my phone, I could use this option from these drop downs to send those tabs across to those devices. That's something that you can only do if you're logged into the web browser, though. I can also do something right here that is saving the page to Pocket. Pocket is an additional add-on feature of the web browser that Mozilla is producing that essentially acts as sort of a more advanced favoriting setting. Not only does it add a bunch of your favorites, but it also recommends pages for you to view based on those. It's not something that I have really enabled on my personal account because the reason that I use Mozilla is I don't like sharing more advanced information. But if you trust Mozilla, and I tend to, honestly, you can take advantage of that feature. You can also copy links natively instead of having to highlight and hit Control-C or copy them, and email links automatically if you have it integrated with your email address. You can also take a screenshot by clicking that, and it'll give you access to the Firefox Screenshots beta. What it does is it saves that screen information where we had to actually print out a PDF in Google Chrome. We can just use this feature to cut and drag and get that information saved as a picture. So I think that's a little bit easier too. As you can see, when I hit next, I click and drag on parts of the page to show what I wanted it to save, and then I just hit on that download button or the copy button to take my screenshot. I think that's a very useful feature too, and in my mind, it's a little bit more user-friendly, but that's because I've been using Firefox for so long. In addition, you have access to this generic search bar here. You can change this setting, but by default, it will apply to a Google search. You can also, similar to Google Chrome, just type a search into your web browser here. If I type Cornerstone and hit enter, while it defaults to jumping to a cornerstone.com, I can actually edit that settings in the more advanced option to, instead of having a separate search bar, just have them the same. By default, it should display like this, but I've turned my settings on in my version of Firefox to enable just single browser use. The way I did that was by going into my advanced settings, which we're going to get to over here in a second as well, more in depth. I also have access to my bookmarks and some of the more favorite sort of options through my library here. That's what this icon here is supposed to indicate, and it's supposed to look like a bunch of books stacked up. This is how you would view your browsing history. If we click on that, as you can see, it's got a bunch of the things that we've used here. Because this is the webinar PC that I'm using, it has a bunch of the webinar history that I've accessed. In addition, I can actually view things in little sidebars. That option is available on most other browsers, including in Google Chrome, but it's a little bit more difficult to find and access, in my opinion. If I then click on the sidebar dropdown, I can change it to bookmarks, or other synced tabs, which are tabs from my other devices. We do have another question. I'm not seeing any drop-downs in Firefox. Okay, thank you for bringing that up to me. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to do that, but like I said, that's part of Firefox's security. It doesn't natively share those sorts of things. Unless other people are seeing it, it shouldn't be automatically showing you those drop-downs. I apologize. I'm not sure that there's a good way to enable that compatibility. But if I have this open, yeah, it's not showing you my settings. Well, that is very annoying. Let me go ahead and highlight the areas that I was clicking on then. Thank you very much for letting me know. Let me go ahead and do that. Sorry about that. I'm going to highlight these. The arrows that I have highlighted now were forward and back, reload right next to that, and home right next to that. Then the area that I have highlighted now is the general URL line. This right here that I'm highlighting now is the search bar. I'm going to clear those out. Here we go. Then, in addition to that, the menu option that I was accessing for all of my normal menus is this triple dash right here. And then this drop down here, which I'm about to click on actually, which is what I was going to present next, allows me to get into the bookmark options. From what I'm seeing on my webinar screen, you should be able to see that as well. Then the pocket option, I believe, should display too. Yes, it looks like it's displaying. And then because Pocket is a separate service, you would have to sign in to use it. Favorites are right up here by clicking the star. And that will throw it into your library. There we go. And your bookmarks are right over here as well. As long as, and you can access that sidebar by clicking that sidebar option right up here. Hopefully that's a little bit better. Please let me know if you still have any other questions on how to access any of the features that I've just demonstrated. In addition, similarly to Google Chrome, you can do add-ons. In order to access add-ons, you just click on the open menu section and hit add-ons right here. The store is a lot more limited, so you don't have access to a bunch of different add-ons. But as you can see right here, it'll actually tell you if an add-on is unsupported by the version of Firefox you're running. This version of Firefox is not the most up-to-date one, but they've kept a lot of things very similar. So a lot of those features that I've been describing are basically the same across a lot of different updates. A lot of the updates Firefox does don't necessarily add additional features, but what they do is they update the security settings of the actual web browser. One of the things that I like about Firefox as well, because it does take security a lot more seriously, is it has access to a website tracker if you have a login, or not necessarily a website tracker, but a security tracker. It's not really able to be shown, I think, in this version of Firefox, but what it does do is if you have a Firefox account, it'll take your email address and automatically search for that email address in known leaks. So if a website or if a company has a leak and they publicize that they've had a information leak, Firefox will notify you about whether or not your email address, your passwords were leaked as part of that, and it'll give you the option to change those settings and let you know to change your email address if you're doing that. That's something that I particularly like about the add-ons and things that you can throw into Mozilla. In addition, you can access your plugins through this plugin option, themes, and other extensions you have installed. If you're using Firefox, though, I don't think it's something that you particularly want to use for extensions. It's more useful for keeping your browsing data a little bit more private. So that's what I recommend for that. If you have any other more advanced set questions about any of the ones that we've covered here today, or any of the browsers or any other web browser, please let me know. But that sort of concludes our general walkthroughs. That being said, as far as takeaways are concerned, if we get back into our slideshow, these are my recommendations for the browsers that we've covered. If you're using something on Windows, I'd heavily recommend using Firefox just for speed or privacy concerns. But if you're a little less concerned about where your browsing data is going, then I'd highly recommend trying Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome. Because Edge and Chrome are a little bit more powerful, I think from desktop points of view, it's going to be more useful. But if you're using sort of an older device, or you're using a device that is more optimized for mobile use, it might not necessarily be the best. If in mobile use cases, I'd recommend Firefox. Also, if you have a mix match between like a Windows PC and an Apple phone, or an Apple phone and a Windows PC, or maybe if you even run Linux at home, I'd recommend using either Firefox or Chrome instead of Safari. And if you want to gain access to all those browsing sort of transitional features that I talked about earlier in the presentation. Also, if you want to use an Apple product and just use Apple products, I'd recommend Safari. But that being said, there are a lot of other web browsers out there. All we've really covered are the main ones, meaning things that have the most market share, I guess. But there are a bunch of other web browsers, including Opera, Vivaldi, Brave, and Epic. Those are just some of the top ones that I've mentioned, and that changes year to year. Web browsers are one of those areas of tech that are constantly updating and constantly adding new features. So we're going to be doing another one of these next year, and I'm probably going to recommend the exact same ones, but maybe we'll do a little bit more of a in-depth walkthrough of new Edge as well. If you have any questions on any other web browsers, specifically secure web browsers, that's something that I'd also be happy to answer any questions about. And if you have any questions on it, just respond to the email I'm going to be sending out after this presentation and let me know. One of the ones that my friends use pretty frequently is either a Tor or DuckDuckGo. Those web browsers don't collect any data at all about anything that you're doing. And they're very bare bones, so I didn't include them in the presentation. But because they don't track any data, they don't have any of the more advanced use features that I've shown, and they aren't compatible with other plugins either. So if you're just using your web browser to access websites, that's what I'd recommend if you're trying not to. Phil has a question here. Can I touch on VPNs briefly? Actually, I am going to go a lot more in depth on VPNs, Phil, but we're not going to go fully in depth now. VPNs I'm actually going to do next month, but in upcoming things to be concerned about, we're actually covering data security in our next webinar. Our next webinar is going to be with Jeff Draver, unless things change and as everyone goes back to work. We're going to be covering internet security, how to stay secure online, as well as some West web practices. And then after that, we're going to get into a little bit more in depth. We have another question too about the secure web browsers from one of our internal employees. Is it called Thor? There are two different browsing options here. Thor is a web browser as well, but TOR is something different as well. So those are two very specific browsers. They operate a little bit differently, but both generally do the same thing. Also, if we have any other general questions, I'm going to be here on the line for a little bit longer. But some other things to consider. Tomorrow we have our individual corner from Jeff Beglin. If you're interested in learning more about Emeritus, I'd highly recommend attending because our guest is going to be Emeritus's National Sales Director, Todd Cohen. He'll be covering a lot of the new things going on with Emeritus, as well as some other products that they're going to be releasing. Also, Build Your Brand is going to be next week, same time as this presentation. They're going to be covering LinkedIn 101 with Jess Larkin and how to make the best use of LinkedIn. So I'd highly recommend attending that, especially now that a bunch of people are using LinkedIn to connect since we're all online instead of in the office. If you have any other questions on web browsers, like I said, I'm going to stay out here for a little bit longer. So feel free to ask them in the question section. Also, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, my email address is tlevine@crnstone.com. So that's something to contact me about if you have any other specific questions. Actually, Leslie, circling back to your question about Thor or Tor, I really don't use those web browsers often personally. That information is to the best of my knowledge. So because I don't tend to use a lot of the more secure web browsers, I don't natively know a lot of those features. But that's just what I understand from different websites without a little bit more additional research on them. So take it with a tiny bit of salt. All right. It looks like we don't have any other questions. I'm going to be sending out links to all of the different download pages for a lot of the different websites we've been talking about, including Safari, actually. If you are an Apple user, it should be installed natively. But if you've switched to something else and uninstalled it, then I'm going to just include that just in case. But thank you very much for attending Tech Tuesday, and we hope to see you again next week when we have Jeff Draver in our office to cover security. So thank you and have a wonderful, wonderful day.